and welcome back to Teen Story Share. Today we're going to be continuing The Best Christmas Pageant Ever by Barbara Robinson, which we started last time, and I'll be putting the link to that below if you missed it. So we're just going to dive right in, and we're going to read 2 more chapters today, and then that will be it. Teen Story Share will then take a break for the holidays, and we'll be back in January with a brand new story. Chapter 3. Mrs. Armstrong, who was still trying to run things from her hospital bed, said that the same people always got the main parts. "But it's important to give everybody a chance," she told Mother over the telephone. "Let me tell you what I do." Mother sighed and turned off the heat under the pork chops. "All right, Helen," she said. Mrs. Armstrong called Mother at least every other day, and she always called at supper time. "Don't let me interrupt your supper," she always said, and then went right ahead and did it anyway, while my father paced up and down the hall, saying things under his breath about Mrs. Armstrong. "Here's what I do," Mrs. Armstrong said. "I get them all together and tell them about the rehearsals, and that they must be on time and pay close attention. Then I tell them that the main parts are Mary and Joseph and the wise men and the angel of the Lord, and then I always remind them that there are no small parts, only small actors." "Do they understand what that means?" asked Mother. "Oh yes," Mrs. Armstrong said. Later, Mother asked me if I knew what that meant about small parts and small actors. I didn't really know. None of us did. It was just something Mrs. Armstrong always said. "I guess it means that the short kids have to be in the front row of the angel choir, or else nobody can see them?" "I thought so," Mother said. "It doesn't mean that at all. It really means that every single person in the pageant is just as important as every other person, that the littlest baby angel is just as important as Mary." "Go and tell that to Alice Wendelkin," I said, and Mother told me not to be so fresh. She didn't get very mad, though, because she knew I was right. You could have a Christmas pageant without any baby angels, but you couldn't have one without a Mary. Mrs. Armstrong knew it, too. "I always start with Mary," she told Mother over the telephone. "I tell them that we must choose our Mary carefully, because Mary was the mother of Jesus." "I know that," Mother said, wanting to get off the telephone and cook the pork chops. "Yes, I tell them that our Mary should be a cheerful, happy little girl who is unselfish and kind to others. Then I tell them about Joseph, that he was God's choice to be Jesus' father, and that Joseph ought to be a little boy." She went on and got as far as the second wise man, when Mother said, "Helen, I'll have to go now. There's somebody at the door." Actually, there was somebody at the door. It was my father, standing out on the porch in his coat and hat, leaning on the doorbell. When Mother let him in, he took off his hat and bowed to her. "Lady, can you give me some supper? I haven't had a square meal in 3 days." "Oh, for goodness sake," Mother said. "Come on in. What will the neighbors think to see you standing out there ringing your own doorbell? And why didn't you ring the doorbell 10 minutes ago?" Mrs. Armstrong called Mother 2 more times that week to tell her that people could hem up the costumes but couldn't cut them, and to tell her not to let the angel choir wear lipstick. And by Sunday, Mother was already sick of the whole thing. After church, we all filed into the back 7 pews, along with 2 or 3 Sunday school teachers who were supposed to keep everybody quiet. It was a terrible time to try to keep everybody quiet. All the little kids were tired, and all the big kids were hungry, and all the mothers wanted to go home and cook dinner, and all the fathers wanted to go home and watch the football game on TV. "Now, this isn't going to take very long," Mother told us. My father had said it better not take very long, because he wanted to watch the football game too. He also wanted to eat, he said. He hadn't had a decent meal all week. "First, I'm going to tell you about the rehearsals," Mother said. "We'll have our rehearsals on Wednesdays at 6:30. We're only going to have 5 rehearsals, so you must all try to be present at every one." "What if we get sick?" asked a little kid in the front pew. "You won't get sick," Mother told him, which was exactly what she told Charlie that morning, when Charlie said he didn't want to be a shepherd and would be sick to his stomach if she made him be one. "Now, You little children in the cradle room and the primary class will be our angels, Mother said. You'll like that, won't you? They all said yes. What else could they say? The older boys and girls will be shepherds and guests at the inn and members of the choir. Mother was really zipping along, and I thought how mad Mrs. Armstrong would be about all the things she was leaving out. And we need Mary and Joseph, the 3 wise men, and the angel of the Lord. They aren't hard parts, but they're very important parts. So those people must absolutely come to every rehearsal. What if they get sick? It was the same little kid, and it made you wonder what kind of little kid he was to be so interested in sickness. They won't get sick either, Mother said, looking a little cross. Now, we all know what kind of person Mary was. She was quiet and gentle and kind, and the little girl who plays Mary should try to be that kind of person. I know that many of you would like to be Mary in our pageant, but of course we can only have one Mary. So, I'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll all decide together which girl should get the part. And that was pretty safe to say, since the only person who ever raised her hand was Alice Wendelkin. But Alice just sat there, chewing on a piece of her hair and looking down at the floor. And the only person who raised her hand this time was Imogen Herdman. Did you have a question, Imogen? Mother asked. I guess that was the only reason she could think of for Imogen to have her hand up. No, Imogen said. I want to be Mary. She looked back over her shoulder. And Ralph wants to be Joseph. Yeah, Ralph said. Mother just stared at them. It was like a detective movie, when the nice little old gray-haired lady sticks a gun in the bank window and says, "Give me all your money," and you can't believe it. Mother couldn't believe this. Well, she said after a minute, we want to be sure that everyone has a chance. Does anyone else want to volunteer for Joseph? No one did. No one ever did, especially not Elmer Hopkins. But he couldn't do anything about it because he was the minister's son. One year he didn't volunteer to be Joseph, and neither did anyone else, and afterward I heard Reverend Hopkins taking Elmer out to the hall. You're going to be Joseph, Reverend Hopkins said. That's it. I don't want to be Joseph, Elmer told him. I'm too big and I feel dumb up there, and all those little kids give me a pain in the neck. I can understand that, Reverend Hopkins said. I can even sympathize. But till somebody else volunteers for Joseph, you're stuck with it. Nobody's ever going to do that, Elmer said. I even offered Grady Baker 50 cents to be Joseph and he wouldn't do it. I'm going to have to be Joseph for the rest of my life. Cheer up, Reverend Hopkins told him. Maybe somebody will turn up. I'll bet he didn't think the somebody would be Ralph Herdman. All right, Mother said. Ralph will be our Joseph. Now, does anyone else want to volunteer for Mary? Mother looked all around, trying to catch somebody's eye. Anybody's eye. Janet? Roberta? Alice, you don't want to volunteer this year? No, Alice said, so low you could hardly hear her. I don't want to. Nobody volunteered to be wise men either, except Leroy, Claude, and Ollie Herdman. So there was my mother stuck with a Christmas pageant full of Herdmans in the main roles. There was one Herdman left over and one main role left over, and you didn't have to be very smart to figure out that Gladys was going to be the angel of the Lord. What do I have to do? Gladys wanted to know. The angel of the Lord was the one who brought the good news to the shepherds, Mother said. Right away, all the shepherds began to wriggle around in their seats, figuring that any good news Gladys brought them would come with a smack in the teeth. Charlie's friend Hobie Carmichael raised his hand and said, I can't be a shepherd. We're going to Philadelphia. Why didn't you say so before? Mother asked. I forgot. Another kid said, My mother doesn't want me to be a shepherd. Why not? Mother said. I don't know. She just said, don't be a shepherd. One kid was honest. Gladys Herdman hits too hard, he said. Why, Gladys isn't going to hit anybody, Mother said. What an idea! The angel just visits the shepherds in the fields and tells them Jesus is born. And hits them, said the kid. Of course, he was right. You could just picture Gladys whamming shepherds left and right, but Mother said that was perfectly ridiculous. I don't want to hear another word about it, she said. No shepherds may quit, or get sick, she added before the kid in the front pew could ask. While everybody was leaving, Mother grabbed Alice Wendelkin by the arm and said, Alice, why in the world didn't you raise your hand to be Mary? I don't know, Alice said, looking mad. But I knew. I'd heard Imogen Herdman telling Alice what would happen to her if she dared to volunteer. All the ordinary, everyday Herdman things, like clonking you on the head and drawing pictures all over your homework papers and putting worms in your coat pocket. I don't care, Alice told her. I don't care what you do. I'm always Mary in the pageant. And next spring, Imogen went on, squinching up her eyes, when the pussy willows come out, I'll stick a pussy willow so far down your ear that nobody can reach it. And it'll sprout there, and it'll grow, and you'll spend the rest of your life with a pussy willow bush growing out of your ear. You had to admire her. That was the worst thing any of them ever thought up to do. Of course, some people might not think it could happen, but it could. Ollie Herdman did it once. He got this terrible earache in school, and when the nurse looked down his ear with her little lighted tube, she yelled so loud you could hear her all the way down the hall. He's got something growing down there, she hollered. They had to take Ollie to the hospital and put him under, and dig this sprouted pussy willow out of his ear. So that was why Alice kept her mouth shut about being Mary. You know she wouldn't do all those things she said, I told Alice as we walked home. Yes, she would, Alice said. Herdmans will do anything. But your mother should have told them no. Somebody should put Imogen out of the pageant, and all the rest of them too. They'll do something terrible and ruin the whole thing. I thought she was probably right, and so did lots of other people, and for 2 or 3 days all anybody could talk about was the Herdmans being Mary and Joseph and all. Mrs. Homer McCarthy called Mother to say that she had been thinking about it, and if the Herdmans wanted to participate in our Christmas celebration, why didn't we let them hand out programs at the door? We don't have programs for the Christmas pageant, Mother said. Well, maybe we ought to get some printed and put the Herdmans in charge of that. Alice's mother told the ladies' aid that it was sacrilegious to let Imogen Herdman be Mary. Somebody we never even heard of called up Mother on the telephone and said her name was Hazelbeck and she lived on Sproul Hill. And was it true that Imogen Herdman was going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, in a church play? Yes, Mother said. Imogen is going to be Mary in our Christmas pageant. And the rest of them too? The lady asked. Yes, Ralph is going to be Joseph and the others are the wise men and the angel of the Lord. You must be crazy, this Mrs. Hazelbeck told Mother. I live next door to that outfit with their yelling and screaming and their insane cat and their garage door going up and down all day long, and let me tell you, you're in for a rowdy time. Some people said it wasn't fair for a whole family who didn't even go to our church to barge in and take over the pageant. My father said somebody better lock up the Women's Society silver service. My mother just said she would rather be in the hospital with Mrs. Armstrong. But then the flower committee took a potted geranium to Mrs. Armstrong and told her what was going on, and she nearly fell out of bed, traction bars and all. I feel personally responsible, she said. Whatever happens, I accept the blame. If I'd been up and around and doing my duty, this never would have happened. And that made my mother so mad she couldn't see straight. If she'd been up and around, it wouldn't have happened, Mother said. That woman! She must be surprised that the sun is still coming up every morning without her to supervise the sunrise. Well, let me tell you. Don't tell me, my father said. I'm on your side. I just mean that Helen Armstrong is not the only woman alive who can run a Christmas pageant. Up till now, I'd made up my mind just to do the best I could under the circumstances. But now, she stabbed a meat fork into the pot roast. I'm going to make this the very best Christmas pageant anybody ever saw. And I'm going to do it with Herdman's too. After all, they raised their hands and nobody else did. And that's that. And it was too. For one thing, nobody else wanted to take over the pageant, with or without Herdman's. And for another thing, Reverend Hopkins got fed up with all the complaints and told everybody where to get off. Of course, he didn't say, "Go jump in the lake, Mrs. Wendelkin," or anything like that. He just reminded everyone that when Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," Jesus meant all the little children, including Herdman's. So that shut everybody up, even Alice's mother. And the next Wednesday, we started rehearsals. Chapter 4. The first pageant rehearsal was usually about as much fun as a 3-hour ride on the school bus, and just as noisy and crowded. This rehearsal, though, was different. Everybody shut up and settled down right away, for fear of missing something awful that the Herdmans might do. They got there 10 minutes late, sliding into the room like a bunch of outlaws about to shoot up a saloon. When Leroy passed Charlie, he knuckled him behind the ear, and one little primary girl yelled as Gladys went by. But Mother had said she was going to ignore everything except blood, and since the primary kid wasn't bleeding and neither was Charlie, nothing happened. Mother said, "And here's the Herdman family. We're glad to see you all," which was probably the biggest lie ever said right out loud in the church. Imogen smiled. The Herdman smile, we called it, sly and sneaky. And there they sat, the closest thing to criminals that we knew about, and they were going to represent the best and most beautiful. No wonder everybody was so worked up. Mother started to separate everyone into angels and shepherds and guests at the inn, but right away she ran into trouble. Who were the shepherds? Leroy Herdman wanted to know. Where did they come from? Ollie Herdman didn't even know what a shepherd was, or anyway, that's what he said. What was the inn? Claude asked. What's an inn? It's like a motel, somebody told him, where people go to spend the night. What people? Claude said. Jesus? Oh, honestly, Alice Wendelkin grumbled. Jesus wasn't even born yet. Mary and Joseph went there. Why? Ralph asked. What happened first? Imogen hollered at my mother. Begin at the beginning. That really scared me because the beginning would be the book of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning. And if we were going to have to start with the book of Genesis, we'd never get through. The thing was, the Herdmans didn't know anything about the Christmas story. They knew that Christmas was Jesus' birthday, but everything else was news to them. The shepherds, the wise men, the star, the stable, the crowded inn. It was hard to believe. At least it was hard for me to believe. Alice Wendelkin said she didn't have any trouble believing it. How would they find out about the Christmas story? She said. They don't even know what a Bible is. Look what Gladys did to that Bible last week. While Imogen was snitching money from the collection plate in my class, Gladys and Ollie drew mustaches and tails on all the disciples in the primary grade illustrated Bible. They never went to church in their whole life till your little brother told them we got refreshments, Alice said. And all you ever hear about Christmas in school is how to make ornaments out of aluminum foil. So how would they know about the Christmas story? She was right. Of course, they might have read about it, but they never read anything except amazing comics. And they might have heard about it on TV, except that Ralph paid 65 cents for their TV at a garage sale, and you couldn't see anything on it unless somebody held onto the antenna. Even then, you couldn't see much. The only other way for them to hear about the Christmas story was from their parents, and I guess Mr. Herdman never got around to it before he climbed on the railroad train. And it was pretty clear that Mrs. Herdman had given up ever trying to tell them anything. So, they just didn't know. And Mother said she had better begin by reading the Christmas story from the Bible. This was a pain in the neck to most of us, because we knew the whole thing backward and forward, and never had to be told anything except who we were supposed to be and where we were supposed to stand. Joseph and Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. Pregnant! Yelled Ralph Herdman. Well, that stirred things up. All the big kids began to giggle, and all the little kids wanted to know what was so funny, and Mother had to hammer on the floor with a blackboard pointer. That's enough, Ralph, she said, and went on with the story. I don't think it's very nice to say that Mary was pregnant, Alice whispered to me. But she was, I pointed out. In a way, though, I agreed with her. It sounded too ordinary. Anybody could be pregnant. Great with child sounded better for Mary. I'm not supposed to talk about people being pregnant. Alice folded her hands in her lap and pinched her lips together. I'd better tell my mother. Tell her what? That your mother is talking about things like that in church. My mother might not want me to be here. I was pretty sure she would do it. She wanted to be Mary, and she was mad at Mother. I knew, too, that she would make it sound worse than it was, and Mrs. Wendelken would get madder than she already was. Mrs. Wendelken didn't even want cats to have kittens or birds to lay eggs, and she wouldn't let Alice play with anybody who had 2 rabbits. But there wasn't much I could do about it except pinch Alice, which I did. She yelped, and Mother separated us and made me sit beside Imogen Herdman and sent Alice to sit in the middle of the baby angels. I wasn't crazy to sit next to Imogen. After all, I'd spent my whole life staying away from Imogen. But she didn't even notice me. Not much, anyway. Shut up, was all she said. I want to hear her. I couldn't believe it. Among other things, the Herdmans were famous for never sitting still and never paying attention to anyone. Teachers, parents, their own or anybody else's, the truant officer, the police. Yet here they were, eyes glued on my mother and taking in every word. What's that? They would yell whenever they didn't understand the language. And when Mother read about there being no room at the inn, Imogen's jaw dropped and she sat up in her seat. My gosh, she said, not even for Jesus? I saw Alice Wendelken purse her lips together, so I knew that was something else Mrs. Wendelken would hear about. Swearing in the church. Well, now, after all, Mother explained, nobody knew the baby was going to turn out to be Jesus. You said Mary knew, Ralph said. Why didn't she tell them? I would have told them, Imogen put in. Boy, would I have told them. What was the matter with Joseph that he didn't tell them? Her pregnant and everything, she grumbled. What was that they laid the baby in? Leroy said. That manger. Is that like a bed? Why would they have a bed in a barn? That's just the point, Mother said. They didn't have a bed in the barn, so Mary and Joseph had to use whatever there was. What would you do if you had a new baby and no bed to put the baby in? We put Gladys in a bureau drawer, Imogen volunteered. Well, there you are, Mother said, blinking a little. You didn't have a bed for Gladys, so you had to use something else. Oh, we had a bed, Ralph said, only Ollie was still in it and he wouldn't get out. He didn't like Gladys, he elbowed Ollie. Remember how you didn't like Gladys? I thought that was pretty smart of Ollie not to like Gladys right off the bat. Anyway, Mother said, Mary and Joseph used the manger. A manger is a large wooden feeding trough for animals. What were the wadded up clothes? Claude wanted to know. The what? Mother said. You read about it. She wrapped him in wadded up clothes. Swaddling clothes, Mother sighed. Long ago, people used to wrap their babies very tightly in big pieces of material so they couldn't move around. It made the babies feel cozy and comfortable. I thought it probably just made the babies mad. Till then, I didn't know what swaddling clothes were either, and they sounded terrible, so I wasn't too surprised when Imogen got all excited about that. You mean they tied him up and put him in a feed box? She said. Where was the child welfare? The child welfare was always checking up on the Herdmans. I'll bet if the child welfare had ever found Gladys all tied up in a bureau drawer, they would have done something about it. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, Mother went on, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and Shazam! Gladys yelled, flinging her arms out and smacking the kid next to her. What? Mother said. Mother never read Amazing Comics. Out of the black night, with horrible vengeance, the mighty Marvo. I don't know what you're talking about, Gladys, Mother said. This is the angel of the Lord, who comes to the shepherds in the fields and... Out of nowhere, right? Gladys said. In the black night, right? Well, Mother looked unhappy. In a way. So Gladys sat back down looking very satisfied, as if this was at least one part of the Christmas story that made sense to her. And now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Mother went on reading, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, That's you, Leroy, Ralph said, and Claude and Ollie, so pay attention. What does it mean, wise men? Ollie wanted to know. Were they like school teachers? No, dumbbell, Claude said. It means like President of the United States. Mother looked surprised and a little pleased, like she did when Charlie finally learned the times tables up to 5. Why, that's very close, Claude, she said. Actually, they were kings. Well, it's about time, Imogen muttered. Maybe they'll tell the innkeeper where to get off and get the baby out of the barn. They saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him, and presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. What's that stuff? Leroy wanted to know. Precious oils, Mother said, and fragrant resins. Oil? Imogen hollered. What kind of cheap king hands out oil for a present? You get better presents from the firemen. Sometimes the herdmans got Christmas presents at the firemen's party, but the Santa Claus always had to feel all around the packages to be sure they weren't getting bows and arrows or dart guns or anything like that. Imogen usually got sewing cards or jigsaw puzzles, and she never liked them, but I guess she figured they were better than oil. Then we came to King Herod, and the herdmans never heard of him either, so Mother had to explain that it was Herod who sent the wise men to find the baby Jesus. Was it him that sent the crummy presents? Ollie wanted to know, and Mother said it was worse than that. He planned to have the baby Jesus put to death. My gosh, Imogen said. He just got born and already they're out to kill him? The herdmans wanted to know all about Herod, what he looked like, how rich he was, and whether he fought wars with people. He must have been the main king, Claude said, if he could make the other 3 do what he wanted them to do. If I was a king, Leroy said, I wouldn't let some other king push me around. You couldn't help it if he was the main king. I'd go be king somewhere else. They were really interested in Herod, and I figured they liked him. He was so mean he could have been their ancestor, Herod Herdman, but I was wrong. Who's going to be Herod in this play? Leroy said. We don't show Herod in our pageant, Mother said. And they all got mad. They wanted somebody to be Herod so they could beat up on him. I couldn't understand the herdmans. You would have thought the Christmas story came right out of the FBI files. They got so involved in it. Wanted a bloody end to Herod, worried about Mary having her baby in a barn, and called the wise men a bunch of dirty spies. And they left the first rehearsal arguing about whether Joseph should have set fire to the inn or just chased the innkeeper into the next county. That's all we have time for, so if you want to know what happens next, you can come request the book. We do not actually have this book at the library, but we can always get it for you from another library through our ILL service. Quick ILL plug, if you don't know about it, it stands for Interlibrary Loan. It's a free service where we can request books that we don't have for you from other libraries. And when they arrive, we tell you and you can come and pick it up. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this story and I hope you have a great holiday and I will see you later. Bye!